In the tense waters of the Persian Gulf, a swarm of Iranian fast boats closed in, only to realize too late they had picked the wrong U.S. Navy ship to provoke. The sea was calm that morning in the Persian Gulf, a deceptive kind of calm, the kind sailors never truly trusted. On board the USS Hartford, a guided missile destroyer stationed on a routine patrol, the hum of machinery mixed with the occasional chatter of sailors running through their duties. The Gulf always carried tension, like static in the air before a storm, and everyone on the Hartford knew why. Encounters with Iranian fast boats were not uncommon. Sometimes they were harmless, sometimes they were provocative, and sometimes they were something else entirely. Lieutenant Commander David Morales stood on the bridge, coffee mug in hand, his eyes on the horizon. He was a career officer, someone who had spent more years at sea than on land, and he trusted his instincts more than radar screens. And his instincts told him today wasn't going to be an ordinary day. "Sir, radar contact, bearing 085. Small surface vessels. Multiple." The voice of Petty Officer Jenkins, a young radar operator, cut through the bridge. "How many?" Morales asked, setting his coffee down slowly, eyes narrowing. "Hard to say at this range. At least 6, maybe more. Fast movers." Morales muttered under his breath. Fast boats again. Everyone in the region knew the tactic. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy relied on speed, surprise, and swarming tactics. Their small fast attack craft were like hornets, individually weak, but in a swarm, deadly. Against a destroyer like the Hartford, the danger wasn't immediate, but accidents could happen fast. And accidents in the Gulf rarely stayed accidents. Captain Richard Hayes entered the bridge then, adjusting his cover and scanning the digital map. Hayes was the kind of man who carried authority without raising his voice. Years of command had given him a calmness that steadied even the most nervous sailor. But Morales saw something in his captain's eyes, awareness. Hayes knew this wasn't a drill. "Report," Hayes said. "Multiple fast boats, Captain," Morales replied. "Bearing 085, moving at high speed. No radio contact yet." Hayes studied the horizon. "They always push. Question is, how far today?" Minutes dragged on. The boats appeared, black dots on the water, cutting across the Gulf like sharks. Then, without warning, one of the Iranian boats broke formation and fired a burst into the air. The sound was distant, but unmistakable. A show of force, a taunt. "Jesus," muttered one of the sailors under his breath. "They're testing us," Morales said quietly. Hayes gave a single nod. "Helm, maintain course and speed. Weapons, keep CIWS on standby, but do not engage without orders. We're not here to start a war." But what none of them knew yet was that the boats had already made a mistake. The Iranians weren't targeting the Hartford at all. Their orders had been to harass a different vessel, a lightly armed logistics ship supplying coalition forces. The Hartford wasn't supposed to be part of their plan. But in the heat of the moment, in the adrenaline of the Gulf waters, someone on the Iranian side had miscalculated. And miscalculations at sea had a way of spiraling into disasters. The boats closed in, darting across the Hartford's bow, weaving dangerously close. Through binoculars, sailors could see men standing on deck with RPGs slung across their shoulders. The tension was electric, every man on the Hartford's deck ready for the captain's word. "Sir, they're locking radar on us," came the shout from the electronic warfare station. The bridge went still. "Confirm," Hayes demanded. "Confirmed. They've painted us, Captain." Morales felt the air leave his lungs. Painting a ship with targeting radar wasn't just a threat, it was a provocation that, under rules of engagement, could justify a response. And everyone knew that one missile, one trigger pull, could ignite the Gulf like dry tinder. "Captain?" Morales asked, voice tight. Hayes' jaw clenched. "Hold steady. Do not fire unless they do. They want us to flinch. We won't." But then, as if to test the resolve, one of the fast boats broke off and fired a burst from its heavy machine gun, rounds splashing dangerously close to the Hartford's hull. "Direct fire," Captain, shouted Jenkins. Still not a hit, Hayes replied coldly, but Morales could see the fire in his eyes. Another burst, closer this time. Then another. The swarm of boats circled like vultures, daring the Hartford to respond. And somewhere on one of those boats, an Iranian officer realized they had made a grave mistake. This wasn't the logistics ship they were ordered to harass. This was a heavily armed U.S. Navy destroyer. And they had already crossed the line. On board the Hartford, the sailors felt the shift. This wasn't just provocation anymore. This was an attack. Hayes raised his voice, calm but commanding. Weapons, target the lead boat. Fire warning shot across the bow. Seconds later, the Hartford's 5-inch gun thundered, the shell splashing into the sea just yards ahead of the Iranian boat. The echo rolled across the Gulf like thunder. The message was clear: back off. For a moment it worked. The boats hesitated, engines idling, as if reconsidering their options. But adrenaline is a dangerous thing, and pride even more so. One of the Iranian gunners raised his RPG, aimed directly at the Hartford. And time seemed to stop. Every man on the Hartford knew what would happen next if that trigger was pulled. CIWS, engage. Hayes barked. The Hartford's close-in weapons system roared to life, spitting thousands of rounds per minute, tearing through the air with a scream that drowned out everything else. The RPG never left its launcher. The gunner was cut down instantly. The boat erupted into chaos, crew diving for cover. The Gulf was no longer calm. The remaining Iranian boats scattered, some retreating, others still circling, unsure whether to fight or flee. The Hartford was awake now, weapons locked, radar tracking every target. The destroyer had been mistaken for a soft target, and now the mistake was paid for in blood and fire. But deep down, Morales knew this wasn't over. The Iranians wouldn't accept humiliation quietly. Retaliation was coming. And when it did, the Gulf would burn. The silence that followed the CIWS burst was heavier than gunfire. Smoke curled faintly from the barrels, the air thick with the metallic scent of spent rounds. On the deck of the USS Hartford, sailors gripped railings and consoles, their knuckles white. Some stared at the wreckage of the disabled Iranian boat, others at the radar screen where more blips flickered erratically. Damage report? Captain Hayes demanded, his voice cutting clean through the tension. No hits, sir. Hull intact. No casualties, Morales replied, though his throat was dry. Hayes gave a short nod, his eyes locked on the horizon. Good. Keep it that way. The Iranian boats that had survived the burst scattered like startled fish. A few turned back toward the coastline, engines whining as they fled. But not all of them. 3 remained, darting in and out of visual range, circling like wolves too proud or too reckless to admit defeat. Through binoculars, the crew could see men shouting, gesturing wildly, some pointing weapons, others waving fists. They know they screwed up, Morales said quietly to Hayes. Maybe, Hayes answered. But pride's a dangerous thing in these waters. Nobody wants to be the man who ran from an American destroyer. The Gulf stretched endlessly around them, the sun beating down, the water glistening like molten glass. The Hartford's engines hummed steadily, pushing her forward, but every man aboard knew they were still in the kill zone. Sir, Jenkins called from the radar station, new contacts, bearing 140. Larger vessels moving fast. Morales turned sharply. Iranian reinforcements? Can't confirm yet. Range is too long. But they're not fishing boats, that's for sure. Hayes exhaled through his nose. Here we go. The word spread quickly. The Iranians weren't just going to slink back to port. They were calling in backup. Down in the Combat Information Center, sailors worked feverishly, tracking the new signatures, relaying data up to the bridge. The Hartford wasn't alone in the Gulf. Other U.S. and coalition ships patrolled the waters, but in that moment, the destroyer felt like an island surrounded by hostility. On deck, Petty Officer Harris, a gunner's mate, adjusted the feed on one of the .50 caliber mounts. He muttered to the sailor beside him. They wanted a soft target. Picked the wrong damn ship. The other sailor nodded grimly. Yeah, but mistakes get cleaned up quick out here. You think they'll back off? Harris shook his head. Not a chance. Not until somebody bleeds. Back on the bridge, Hayes and Morales weighed their options. Rules of engagement were clear. They couldn't fire unless fired upon, unless the threat was unmistakable. But what counted as unmistakable? A locked radar? An RPG raised? A burst of machine gun fire missing by inches? Every decision was a balancing act between survival and diplomacy. Message from Fifth Fleet, the communications officer announced. They're aware of the situation. Reinforcements are on standby, but we're instructed to avoid escalation if possible. Hayes gave a humorless chuckle. Avoid escalation, he says, while we've already got boats shooting at us. Morales frowned. Sir, if those larger vessels are gunboats, we could be looking at a serious fight. I know, Hayes said softly. But if we fire first, Washington will hang us out to dry. We ride this line until we can't. The Iranian boats still circling them weren't giving up. One sped close to the Hartford starboard side, so close sailors could see the whites of the men's eyes aboard it. Someone raised a flag, green, white, red, the Iranian tricolor, and waved it mockingly before peeling away. They're trying to provoke us into a mistake, Morales said. Or buying time, Hayes replied. The minutes crawled by, each second stretching longer than the last. Then the radar confirmed it. The new contacts weren't fishing vessels or merchant ships. They were armed Iranian gunboats, faster and heavier than the swarm that had first attacked. Estimated time to contact, 20 minutes, Jenkins reported. 20 minutes, Hayes repeated, almost to himself. That's 20 minutes for this to get out of hand. The crew braced for what was coming. Below decks, sailors strapped into their stations. Medics readied triage kits. The mess hall went quiet, men whispering prayers or writing hurried notes they might never deliver. The sea outside remained deceptively calm, the only sound the endless churn of the destroyer's wake. When the Iranian gunboats finally came into visual range, no one mistook their intent. Black holes cutting through the water, crews armed and ready, banners flying. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was a confrontation. The lead gunboat signaled with its lights, a coded message that was quickly translated by the Hartford's comms team. You are in Iranian waters. Leave immediately. Hayes frowned. We're well inside international waters. Doesn't matter to them, Morales said. They'll claim whatever suits them. Hayes grabbed the radio mic and replied in measured tones. This is United States Navy vessel Hartford operating in international waters. We intend no hostility. Recommend you break off your approach. No response came. Instead, the gunboats accelerated. Captain, they're closing fast, Jenkins warned. CIWS on standby, Hayes ordered. Weapons free only, if they fire first. Helm, hold steady. Morales leaned closer. Sir, if they launch even one missile, we won't have time to ask permission to shoot back. We'll be reacting after the fact. I know, Hayes muttered. God help us. The standoff reached its peak when one of the Iranian gunboats fired a single flare into the sky. It arced high, hissing, then burst into bright red fire. On the water, the remaining fast boats surged forward again, engines screaming. It was the signal. All stations, prepare for engagement. Hayes barked. The Hartford's guns swiveled, the destroyer bristling with firepower. The sea that had been so deceptively calm moments earlier now buzzed with impending violence. And then, in the chaos, something happened that none of them expected. From the east, another vessel appeared on radar, moving quickly. Large, not military, but heavy. Identification came through seconds later, an oil tanker flagged under a neutral nation, making its way through the Gulf. Sir, the tanker is entering the engagement zone, Jenkins reported. Morales swore under his breath. Perfect timing. The Iranian boats didn't hesitate. To them, the tanker was as much a symbol of foreign presence as the Hartford. Maybe easier prey, maybe just another way to send a message. Either way, they turned part of their focus toward it, circling dangerously close. Sir, if they hit that tanker, Morales began. We'll have an international incident 10 times bigger than this, Hayes finished grimly. The Iranians had miscalculated once already, attacking a U.S. destroyer instead of the intended soft target. Now, in their frenzy, they were risking another mistake, one that could spill thousands of barrels of oil into the Gulf and drag half the world into chaos. The Hartford's crew waited for the inevitable spark. A trigger pulled, a missile launched, a mistake no one could undo. And as the tension reached its breaking point, Morales whispered the thought everyone else was too afraid to say aloud. This is it. This is how wars start. The Gulf was a cauldron on the verge of boiling over. The oil tanker drifted steadily into the kill zone, oblivious at first to the tense standoff unraveling around it. The Hartford's radar lit up with hostile pings, and the Iranian boats circled like predators confused about which prey to strike first. On the bridge, Captain Hayes stood at the center, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes darted constantly, from radar screens to the horizon, from Morales to the crew. Every second mattered. Every wrong word or hasty trigger could unleash something that no one could control. "Sir, the tanker's captain is transmitting a distress call," the communications officer announced, his voice taut with urgency. "They're reporting harassment by armed vessels, requesting immediate assistance." Hayes clenched his jaw. The tanker wasn't American, but responsibility hung in the air like smoke. If it was attacked while the Hartford sat idle, the world would see it as cowardice or complicity. "Patch me through," Hayes said. Static cracked, then a voice, thickly accented but desperate. "This is merchant vessel Silver Dawn. Iranian boats surrounding us, requesting help. Please, they will fire." The transmission cut off in a squeal of interference. "Sir, they're jamming," Jenkins said from his console. Morales swore under his breath. "They're isolating us." The Iranians didn't waste time. One fast boat darted dangerously close to the tanker's bow, its crew firing warning shots into the water. Another zipped toward the stern, engines screaming, while the larger gunboats hovered like watchful hawks. The message was clear. They could cripple the tanker in seconds. Hayes' knuckles whitened on the railing. "Helm, bring us closer. Put this ship between that tanker and those boats." The Hartford's engines roared, churning the Gulf into white foam as the destroyer shifted course. Every sailor on board felt the decision settle into their bones. They weren't going to stand by. They were stepping into the line of fire. "Captain," Morales said in a low voice, "you know what this means." Hayes nodded grimly. "I do. But if they take that tanker, it's not just oil. It's livelihoods, economies, alliances. We can't let that happen." The Hartford surged forward, her steel bulk cutting the gap. Iranian boats swarmed angrily in response, their engines revving higher, their crews shouting and raising weapons. The air crackled with tension. Then, the first rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the water. It wasn't aimed at the Hartford, but at the Silver Dawn. The tanker's crew screamed over the radio before the line went dead again. The RPG detonated just shy of the hull, spraying seawater high into the air. It was a warning shot, but one far too close for comfort. "That's it," Hayes barked, his voice booming. "Weapons, target the nearest hostile. Engage." The Hartford's 5-inch deck gun thundered, the recoil shaking the ship as the shells slammed into the sea ahead of a fast boat. Splinters of steel and water erupted, the blast tossing the vessel like a toy. The message was unmistakable, no more warnings. Chaos erupted instantly. The Iranian swarm split, some retreating in sudden panic, others pressing forward with blind fury. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, tracers zipping across the water like fiery needles. The Hartford CIWS shrieked to life again, cutting down an incoming missile in a cloud of smoke and debris. "All hands, brace for impact," Morales shouted as another missile screamed toward them. The Hartford CRM fired in response, intercepting it midair with a thunderous explosion. The shockwave rolled across the water, rattling every bone in every body. Below deck, the engineering crew worked furiously, sweat pouring down their faces as alarms wailed. Damage control teams dashed through the corridors, ready for the inevitable. On the bridge, Hayes stood tall, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. Keep the tanker covered. Prioritize missile threats. Do not let them box us in. The battle stretched on in a storm of fire and steel. Every weapon the Hartford had roared in defiance. .50 calibers rattled, chewing through fast boats that darted too close. The 5-inch gun pounded relentlessly, sending columns of spray and fire into the air. And all the while, Iranian crews screamed defiance as they circled like madmen, their courage fueled by pride and desperation. But pride could only carry them so far. One by one, their boats fell. A gunboat took a direct hit and erupted in flame, black smoke spiraling into the sky. Another was shredded by CIWS fire, its pieces vanishing beneath the waves. The Hartford had been mistaken for prey, but it fought like a predator unleashed. On the tanker, the crew watched in stunned silence as the American destroyer shielded them, fire raining all around. Some prayed, some wept, but all knew they had been minutes from disaster. And then, as quickly as it had ignited, the battle began to unravel. The surviving Iranian boats pulled back, retreating toward their coast, their engines howling in defeat. The sea calmed again, though the smoke and wreckage told a different story. Cease fire, Hayes ordered at last. Maintain defensive posture, but cease fire. The Hartford slowed, her guns quiet, her decks littered with shell casings and scorched steel. The crew exhaled as one, the adrenaline draining out, leaving behind exhaustion and disbelief. They had survived. More than that, they had protected the tanker and held their ground. But the weight of what had just happened pressed heavy on every heart. On the bridge, Morales rubbed his temples. Sir, we just fought a battle in the Gulf. That's not going to disappear quietly. Hayes stared out over the water, smoke still curling into the sky.
No.
It's not. Word spread fast. Within hours, Washington was buzzing. News outlets reported unprovoked Iranian aggression, while Tehran decried reckless American provocation. Allies praised the Hartford's defense of the tanker, while diplomats scrambled to cool the firestorm. But on the ship itself, politics felt far away. What mattered were the faces of the crew, the exhaustion in their eyes, the letters still clutched in pockets, undelivered. What mattered was the knowledge that they had stood on the razor's edge of war and hadn't fallen. That night, the Gulf was quiet again. The Hartford sailed under the stars, her crew somber, her decks scarred but intact. Morales found Hayes alone on the bridge, staring at the horizon. Could have been worse, Morales said softly. Hayes didn't look away. Could have been war. They stood in silence for a long while, listening to the hum of the engines and the endless wash of the sea. Finally, Hayes spoke. History won't remember today the way we do. They'll talk about strategy, diplomacy, politics. But the truth is it was just men in boats making choices. Some of them wrong. And we were the ones caught in the middle. Morales nodded. And we'll be the ones who remember the faces. The sounds. The moments we almost didn't make it. The Gulf rolled on beneath them, indifferent as always. But for the men of the Hartford, the memory of that day would never fade. The day Iranian fast boats attacked the wrong U.S. Navy ship. The day a mistake nearly started a war. The day they stood their ground and walked away,